Whatever it is. It's good afternoon. I'm Michael Rael. I am lifetime Questeño and the judge for the last 25 years here. And by the way, October 18th is early voting time at my office, so you can go vote. And once I vote for me, I win. Because nobody's running against me. So anyway, but make sure you go out and vote. You might as well bring that out right away, because if you don't vote, you can't complain. That's the way it is. Anyway, we're going to start this thing called Voces de Nuestro País. Translated in English, it's Voices of Our Area. And when I was making the poster for this thing, I wanted to make sure that people from Costilla, Amalia, Red River, Lama, Cerro, Arroyondo, Taos, everybody knew that they're all welcome to come in and give a story. I started out with asking our first guest tonight, Mark Sideris. Did I spell that? Did I say it right?
Yes.
Did I say it right? Okay. Mark got trapped by the Rael blood when he married my first cousin, Merlin. Yeah. And how long have you been married? Put the mic on.
52 years.
52 years they've been married. And one time somebody asked, how many years have you been married? He said, 52. How many good ones? 11. Anyway, no. But Mark also came to us from Las Cruces, and he was the project manager that rebuilt our church here in Questa. And an incredible job that was done in that church. So that's one of the reasons that I asked Mark to come and talk about that, talk about some of the crazy people he had to work with. As he puts it, wonderful, because he's very nice. But so Mark, I'll give it to you. If you introduce yourself, and then a little bit of history about where you come from, how you ended up in Las Cruces, how you ended up meeting my prima, and then how in the heck they roped you to come to Questa.
You got it. Thank you very much for letting me come. This is quite an honor. One of the questions I often get asked is, are you from Questa? Are you from New Mexico? And I told a reporter one time, no, I'm originally from Buffalo, New York, Niagara Falls, New York. And so the article went out that I came from New York to work on the church in Questa. And it was a little more indirect than that. It was a quite roundabout trip. But back in 1969, I moved from Niagara Falls, New York to Las Cruces, New Mexico to finish my college education. My objective was to work in outdoor recreation and parks management. And while I was going to school at New Mexico State, I worked on the construction of some parks there and worked in the office. Eventually became an administrator in the City Parks and Recreation Department and the Parks and Recreation Director. Then I became the State of New Mexico Parks Director for the state parks in the second Bruce King administration. At that point, knowing it was a politically appointed position, I knew I better plan on doing something else. And since I survived 5 years, so that was good. I was the first state parks director to make a transition between two governors, so that was a feather in my cap.
No kidding.
But after the first year and the next governor, things weren't quite clicking. And I did have the foresight to obtain my general contractor's license while I was in Santa Fe, and had been building since I was a teenager, so it was kind of second nature. The Rael connection came while I was with the City Parks and Recreation Department in Las Cruces. Our secretary was the next door neighbor of one Merlin Rael, and we got introduced. And the rest is history. We had a few kids. We moved from Las Cruces to Santa Fe and then back to Las Cruces. as Merlin was approaching retirement age, an opportunity came up to acquire the house that had belonged to her late aunt and uncle, and we purchased that right next door to the church. And within a year or two of starting the restoration on that house, the wall collapsed at the church. And she and I looked at each other and said, "Do you think God had a reason for you coming to Questa and parking you right next to the church?"
Well, let me cut it real quick there. That house that you're living in is probably as old as the church.
Pretty much. We found, as we were restoring it, there was one corner of the only bedroom in it that still had a piece of baseboard. And behind that baseboard piece, I found a little slip of paper, kind of like a ledger paper, that had the date of March 6th, I think, 1880, and several names and amounts of money that were so somebody was keeping track, and it fell behind the handmade baseboard in the house. So it goes back a long way. In fact, in the little cuartito behind the house, which is probably predates the house, there is a rifle port is carved in the wall there. So I think there was some self-defense going on in that vicinity.
Well, at that time is when Questa had the wall around the church to protect themselves from the, what we call the indigenous, which I think is not a good word, but the Indians that came up here. And they had the bells that would ring, and everybody bring all their cows and horses, whatever they had, into the corrals or the inside there to protect. So that's what you're talking about.
Right,
there.
yeah, exactly, yeah. So when I was building in Las Cruces, when we went back after the Santa Fe State Parks Director job, one of the first things Merlin and I did, my wife Merlin, was restore an old abandoned adobe house. Now, I'm a gringo from not New York City, but Buffalo and Niagara Falls, New York. And I found it very intriguing. I love the thought of working with natural materials. And I also found that a lot of the locals were a little fearful of working with adobe. And so I got to become a major adobe worker in Las Cruces and a bit of an authority. Did some things for the city there in home restorations because I had some experience with it, and other people were a little leery of it. So then we came to Questa in 2007, started restoring the little house, and then the wall collapsed on the church, and I was asked if I would be interested in putting together a crew and starting to work on restoring the church. And I was considering myself semi-retired at the time, and I was concerned about restoring the little house, let alone the whole church, and did not want to get a payroll going again and a hired crew. And so I told your brother, Malachias, JR, and Bobby Ortega, I will oversee volunteers, but I don't want to get a crew again. And if you can generate the volunteers, which seemed like would be available because everybody was saying, over our dead body, are you going to tear down this church? Because the Archdiocese wanted to tear down the church.
Well, let me interject a little quick on that part. Father Dino, I think, was the priest here. And he basically wanted to knock the church down and put in a cracker box, and
steel.
Yeah, but the people fought back. And a real nice story about that is he was in Santa Fe at the Archdiocese, and he was talking about my flock. And Esther Ortega, bless her soul, she gets the over 800 signatures. Here's your flock. All against. And that's when they allowed And then they gave you, what, 5 years to do it?
6.
6 years,
Yeah.
yeah. So that's, bless her heart. I love that story. Here's your flock.
Right. Well, and we were getting really good publicity, and the Catholic Church was not at the time. And my understanding is that Esther went and spoke to the Archbishop and said, "How much more bad news do you want? Because we can." What they did was they allowed a nonprofit organization to own the church while we did the restoration.
Yeah.
And they relented after 2.5 years, and everyone started to scramble. And within about a year was when they asked me if I would oversee the volunteers. And the first year was a little lean with the volunteers. What we did. It was, for those who aren't familiar with it, it was the west-facing wall of the church that had collapsed. And it was the result of mismanagement to a certain degree. People were allowing water to get up against the wall. They had improved the roadway around the church, but in doing so, every time they did that, they raised the roadbed. And there was no foundation under that wall, not even rocks. It was just adobe bricks, 4 feet, laid side by side on a 4-foot wall, and stood for a good 150 or more years. It was interesting, when you would dig down into the soil, you couldn't see the transition between the soil and the bricks until you got up several feet, just because of the water wicking in. And adobe will wick up to 4 feet high before gravity holds the water from going any higher. And it just turned to mush and collapsed. Many other things were going on at the same time. The east wall was leaning over a foot towards your mom's house.
Yeah.
And so after successfully rebuilding the west wall, putting in lots of concrete. We did a foundation. The footing was 2 feet deep and 5 feet wide. The stem wall was 4 feet by 4 feet, solid concrete and steel. And then we came up with 4-foot thick adobe walls, 16 feet. That was so successful that more people got on the bandwagon. And we decided it was time to redo the east wall, straighten that up, and then we moved on to doing the whole north end of the church and adding different things. And it was all volunteers. As you go into the church, everything you see was either done by a local person or somebody from a local person's family. Mm-hmm. I mean, everything was done locally in a community of 1,600 people.
Well, I asked people, say, how many people live in Questa? And I says, when everybody's home for Christmas, it's 2,000.
Okay. Okay. And we were always closed for Christmas.
Yeah, we were closed for Christmas, right?
So it was an interesting group of people. Everyone got along. There was never any bickering or complaining between people. I had comments that some people, oh, really? I mean, other than sarcasm. There was a little sarcasm. But nobody really got angry with each other. And I would get asked, boy, how do you feel after? I mean, we were given 6 years. We got it done in 5.5.
Yes.
And with volunteers and donations, it was just miraculous. And somebody asked me, or more than once probably, have you had enough of working with volunteers now? And I said, I've never had such smooth sailing in my life. These people are here because they want to be here and help. They're not here to earn a paycheck or out of a sense of obligation, although some people felt it was going to be a ticket into heaven. But
well, we used to have a priest, Father Zaya. He was from Italy. you go do work for him and says, and you'll be done. And go, are we going to pay you? We're going to pray for you when you die.
Right.
That was the payment for Father Zach.
Right.
So he's the one that got him set up for wanting that ticket.
I totally get it. I totally get it. But I know there was one gentleman one day, people would come when they could, and I tried to be there like all the time for 6 years, except we would take a break at Christmas time. And one elderly man wanted to climb up on the scaffold and work on the demolition of the west wall. And I won't mention names. I'll mention his name, Felipe. And he got up there. I mean, Felipe was not in the best of health. And I said, Felipe, I don't feel comfortable with you being up here. And he said, Mark, I want to work on the church. I've got time now to do it. If I die in the church. What could be better than that?
Yes.
And frankly, a lot of people had that attitude. The people mixing our mud for all the adobe work and then our cement plaster and everything, they were basically in their late 70s and into their 80s, shovel after shovel after shovel. We laid 30,000 adobes. We poured over 300 cubic yards of concrete. One day when we were working plastering on the wall, this was a few years ago, 10 years ago probably, we had an out-of-towner helping out because he was visiting and wanted to help out. And we were all up on the scaffold working on plastering, and he said, wow, you guys you know what you're doing here. I'm getting kind of bushed, but I probably have a few years on you. And I said, really, how old are you? And he said, I'm 62. And I said, well, I'm 66, and I'm the youngest guy on this whole group. So
that kind of woke him up a little bit.
His mouth dropped. He couldn't believe it. But it was just wonderful. And I must add, after the Archdiocese wanted to tear down the church, and then they saw the progress that this community of genuinely, truly faithful people, the Archbishop at the time, Sheehan, came in and saw the progress that was being made and said, who's responsible for this? And we thought, okay, where's your faith, Archbishop? You know who's responsible for this. And ultimately, before the project was finished, while he was still Archbishop, he got the Archdiocese to contribute $5,000 and subsequently gave an additional $5,000 of his own money. So he had a change of heart. And I'm sure more than once thought, oh my goodness, I could have had that place torn down.
Well, it also, it's because of what you guys were doing here in Questa. Our Lady of Guadalupe Church in Santa Fe was granted the same thing because they used Questa as an example that they could do it like Questa did. That they could use. So because of you guys, it helped another church. And then I was talking, because I'm on the road quite a bit, and there's another church somewhere close to Cloudcroft somewhere that was also given permission because they used Questa as an example. Because this is the greatest example of a church that, as I tell people, back in 1875 when they rebuilt it, I understand, I don't know how true it is, but that you guys found names of the people that worked on there, that the same families that were.
Absolutely, yeah. As we got up working on the ceiling, and it was when they were putting the ceiling planks on that they were very proud of their work, and they signed with beautiful writing. It's just really nice, and got their names on those planks, and it was in 1880s, 1890s. The whole thing was so interesting, and Carrie's here to attest to this. As we were dismantling the old adobes, the bricks themselves, they were all different sizes, and the story is that each family had to bring a certain quantity of adobe bricks to the church construction every Saturday so that they could build. And of course, back in those days, this was 1840, 1850. In the 1850 census, I think there were 50 families in Questa. So we're not talking about a lot of people. And the adobes were some 3 inches thick, some 6 inches thick, this long, this short. They were all different, but they fitted all in together. And then they would eat their lunch as they got partway up the wall, and they would stick their chicken bones in the mud. And Carrie's got held on, I hope, to all of that, those little things. But, I mean, there were pieces of plates and just different things that got left behind during that original
So you have that stuff, Carrie? That would be, I think, to bring here as part of what we're doing here.
We are working on that.
Right.
Yeah.
She has a.
Yeah, and I'm not sure if I have them all or which exactly, but we'll see if we can track.
I'm sure you got a few odds and ends.
Yeah.
I have pictures of just about everything.
Oh,
that
yeah,
came
right.
from
There were occasionally there'd be one of the adobes would have either a deer or a goat footprint, but occasionally even a human footprint, a little kid, going back over 100 years old. That got
Wow.
stepped on while they were letting the mud set up on the bricks. And it was just so special. I mean, working with the genuinely faithful people of the community who it was their entire heritage. Everything in their families had gone through that church. And the last thing they wanted to see was to have the church disappear. And like you say, then tracing it back to their ancestors having built it in the first place. And I mean, you could see where they did the mud plaster and their fingers stroked through the mud before it dried. And that, to me, is just very, very special. And to have lost that would have been horrible. But, so that's who I am. Greatest blessing of my life, being able to be a part of that restoration in this community. It was just, I think, I am a man of faith, and I do think there's a reason why God brought me from Buffalo, New York to Las Cruces, New Mexico, and had me meet Merlin and Rael, and had us plant ourselves in a little house next door to that church.
Yeah, this is why I wanted you to come in, because this little things about the church that you talk about, little things that hardly anybody knows about, basically. Right. This is the first time I hear about the chicken bones. Yeah. But those are stuff that we need. This is why I wanted to do this kind of thing, because we're losing too much. Questa, and we've lost people. Boom. I think 1 month we lost 11 people here.
Yeah.
That's way too much. That we need to bring the stories. And I'm hoping, I don't know, a little disappointed Mark has not showed up, but, maybe he did say if he was single, he'd be here for sure, but since he's married, I don't know. But Mark, if you have any questions for Mark, anything you might want to ask him.
I have
Please.
follow up. Maybe I can use that one. I am interested in some of those experiences that you had while you were working on the church. Those specific things that those of us that see this gorgeous, restored church wouldn't know about. So either experiences, discoveries that you found that you feel comfortable sharing, like the chicken bones, or experiences that you had along the way. I know that a very diverse bunch of people came to volunteer from the community, but also outside the community. So maybe if you could talk a little bit about the way that it brought the community together, but also brought people to the community for this positive thing, and then any other experiences that you had that you think would be an interesting thing to have on the record in a way
Sure.
about the experience of the church.
It's going to be a little bit of a religious testimony, if you can handle that, if you don't mind. It was truly amazing to have that opportunity, be in that building. You know, the priests and the archbishop said, you know, it's only a building. Who cares if it gets torn down? It's much more than just a building. Much, much more. And you could, the most common experience people had walking in while we were working on the church was they would gasp. They would come in and just in awe of being in there. It feels, even with the walls torn down, it felt like a holy place. Had a Baptist preacher in there, standing there halfway rebuilt, with tears rolling down his cheeks, saying, people have been praying in here for over 150 years, and he felt it. I never believed walls could contain anything spiritual until working there. And I feel that way every time I walk in since. So many things happen. I would be there working on my own, thinking, oh man, if I had some help, I could load this in my truck and somebody'd ride in on a bicycle and say, do you need some help? And those things were common. When we had the walls come down and we realized that there was a rope-carved wooden bond beam concealed at the top of the wall under the corbels and vigas, that nobody knew was there. It had been plastered over for a generation or two, first with mud plaster and then gypsum plaster, and it had disappeared from view. So we decided, well, we don't want to lose that beam. Of course, parts of it were rotted, and where the wall collapsed, it was cracked. But we thought, well, maybe we could use it as the lintels over the doorways and windows that we have exposed. And there was exactly to the foot, exactly enough material to catch all the doorways and windows.
Wow.
And that happened. The guys would go up to the mountains to log, to get lumber or trees, and that we would mill. Matty, your brother, with his chainsaw, expert, and we would mill into beams, and I'd tell them how many trees to get, and we go through, and in some cases parts of the tree weren't great and parts were fine, but there was always exactly enough. Always, just exactly what we needed. One special thing that occurred the day after Easter, and I'm not sure what year, 2014 or 13 probably. Matty was milling, we were several of us there, and he was milling 4x8 timbers to be used for the floor joists for the choir loft. We got down to the last one, and he has this chainsaw mill that you little jig and slide the chainsaw on it. Well, he did it, he forgot to deduct an inch or add an inch or something, so it was the wrong size. So I said, well, maybe flip it 90 degrees and we'll see what we get out of that last timber. And he said, I don't know, it's got a lot of knots. And I said to Matty, well, maybe God will give us a pretty picture in the knots. Well, he went through it, and keep in mind, it's the day after Easter, the resurrected Jesus, and out comes what looked like the Madonna cradling a lamb in her arms in one of the knots. And I contacted a niece. I took a picture and said, "You think this is worthy of sending around on Facebook or whatever?" And she said, "Oh yeah." Well, we had news stations from Albuquerque coming here, and things going worldwide. It's become known as the Questa Madonna, and people have asked, "Well, where should we put it?" I said, "God knew we were cutting the floor joist for the choir loft, so we're going to put it as a floor joist right over the middle aisle in the church. We'll put a spotlight on it, and there it will be." And so once that happened, people that were reluctant to support the project suddenly got on the bandwagon and thought, wow, for that to just... The other coincidental thing about it, which not... My mom used to say there's no such thing as coincidence. Everything happens for a reason. That tree, we counted the tree rings. It was 170 years old, and it was from up here on the mountain. So that tree came up as a seedling when the church was emerging from the ground. So, I don't know. Some people say, you're reading a lot into this, but to me it was very special. And things like that.
Sometimes it could be a spiritual thing.
What's that?
Sometimes it could be a spiritual thing that since it was going towards the church.
Well, certainly was for those of us working on it.
Yeah.
And, every day that we worked, every Saturday for sure, Father Andrew would give us a blessing and nobody got hurt. And we all got along, even with some people being sarcastic.
And we won't mention Felipe's name.
We also, in all honesty, we also had a refrigerator there that we kept well stocked with beverages for after we finished our work. And interestingly, I've been around construction sites my whole life, and there's a lot of talk between the men on construction sites, which you can imagine about conquests and things. On this project, the talks at the end of the workday were about family, God, kids, the project. Just as interesting. And it was a beautiful experience with families would bring their kids would help. When and we were able to do that because the community owned the church at the time.
Yeah.
And then we turned it back to the archdiocese. Now that we built the new rectory for the church, we were told we couldn't have anybody under 18 working with us because of all the lawsuits in the church. And I was just heartbroken. It was so good for those kids to experience working with their grown people in the community that weren't perverts, that were really sincerely persons of faith. And they got to be playful and run around, and my own grandson was there since he was 2 years old. And it's just a shame that they couldn't help with the rectory because of the atmosphere in the church at the time. But anyhow, I'd be more than happy to share, and we could pray. Anyway, any questions? Yeah.
Mark Sideris, Tim.
So,
Do you want to?
Mark,
Hi.
I'll just try to speak loudly.
Okay.
If that's okay. Thank you for sharing your story. It's so vital, and what you have done, what the community has done, is such a grace, for everyone here, and it kind of reminds me. My grandfather was a minister in Pennsylvania, where I grew up before I came here, and he was part of kind of a humanist movement that was going on. So when he told the stories of the loaves and fishes, the miracle that occurred during that time, which I don't doubt there was something miraculous that occurred, but he also kind of put it in this human state of, people came to hear this prophet talk, and probably a lot of them brought sandwiches or food, picnic kind of thing, and maybe some didn't, but the whole thing was they were so touched by what this prophet was saying that they just shared everything with each other, So you had that value happening of sharing, and what you were talking about, Mark, with the camaraderie and the blending of everybody together made me think about that story of the human side of the miracle.
Absolutely, and the genuineness of the people. Everybody wanted to help, and they would come to work in the morning. What can I do? It was just, I see things on the news of all the victims there are everywhere, and who's going to do something for us? We had a flood. Who's going to take care of us? And here, it was, we are. We're here, therefore we're going to do it. And they just gathered together and made it happen. And like I say, blessing of my life to have been in the middle of it. It was just undeserved.
Well, that's what it's about, is to share stories, which is what so if you're out there, if you're listening out there and you guys hear, want to be part of this, let me know. And we'll even let you talk. I'll even let you talk, like I let Mark talk a little bit.
I have another question.
Are
you willing to answer?
He's got no choice. He's here. He's here right now.
So a lot of people in this room probably volunteered, but some of us didn't have that opportunity. So could you tell us what kind of a normal day might have looked like? You mentioned a little bit about that already, but do you think you could kind of describe what it was like, and maybe also for you as the leader, what it was like to always feel like you had to know what was next and how you handled that?
Well, what's next is like, in construction, is like trying to do a Rubik's Cube. You know what you need to do on this side, but it affects everything else all the way around. And then you've got the weather, and you've got building inspectors and other things that muddy up the water sometimes. Although the building inspectors in this case were wonderful. There was no typical day because we were working through phases all the time. Never knew when we were going to come across a bone. And so we had to be alert for things like that. We had Carrie Levin there with her camera more often than not. And but typically we would start the morning or the afternoon. We had crews at different times, different days. Saturdays was always in the morning. Initially, I thought we would be having a lunch break and then going back to work in the afternoon. But after people had put in a good long morning's worth of work and they had that big meal for lunch, volunteers bringing in wonderful meals every Saturday, it was time to call it a day. There was no way they were going to get back at it, usually. But we also had crews during the week. Started out being in the evenings because most of the people were working. As the mine closed and more people were let go or retired, towards the latter years of the project, we had crews running during the daytime hours as well. Some days I would be there in the morning with a morning crew, have kind of the afternoon off, and then an evening crew again. But typically the way it started with major, influx of volunteers was on Saturdays. We would have a blessing from the priest, and I would tell people we were going to be working on. Initially, it was we're going to lay 3 rows of adobes on this wall or whatever. But people were, as we got further along, we had multiple tasks going on, sanding timbers, plastering, different things going on. People kind of just were allowed to choose where they wanted to work in the scope of what we were doing. People actually driving into town, driving through Questa, would stop and see what was going on and would ask if they could stick around for a few hours and help. That happened quite often, actually. We also had people who came from as far away as Colorado Springs and Los Alamos regularly to be here for the Saturday work. And we would have a break mid-morning, refreshments afterward. And very, very simple. And people were encouraged to try something new if they had, I've never laid an adobe before. That was something I thought was very interesting. Most of the people in the community, having grown up in adobe homes largely, really didn't know the first thing about adobe construction. And so that was a bit of a learning experience for even the locals. Some had done a little repair or something here and there, but as far as actually putting the line levels and getting everything done, you don't notice it, but that the walls in that church lean in 4 inches from bottom to top. They're flush on, or plumb, I should say, level on the inside, but sloping on the outside. And that's one of those optical illusions you don't see because it's looking up. But anyhow, I got to prepare ahead of time for all those little things, marking off where the next rows go. We were challenged very often, and one day I ran into a scripture in the book of Chronicles that says, "Be strong and courageous, do not be afraid, because I am with you, and I will see to it that the house of the Lord is built correctly." So I wrote that down on a slab of wood and I hung it in the church. And when we were working on the east wall, we had put up the shoring inside the church at the ends of the corbels. And then we took the corbels down and we rebuilt the east wall plumb, level, without realizing that it had leaned over a foot over the years. And so all the shoring that was on the inside wouldn't let us put the corbels where we needed to put them because now the wall was plumb. And I happened to have my radio on, which I often had on, playing Christian music and stuff, and they would do a scripture of the day. And the scripture of the day was, "Be strong and courageous and do the work. Do not be afraid of the size of the task." And I thought, oh, that's coincidental. That's what we have here every day. And so I'm starting to fret after a few days. We've got to move some stuff, and it's holding the roof up, and what are we going to do? And on the same radio station comes on from a different book in the Bible, "Have I not commanded you? Be strong and courageous." And I thought, my gosh, God is using high-tech, modern technology to pass the same quote 3 times while we're dealing with this thing. So I thought, I laughed. I thought, okay, I got it. It took me 3 times, but I got it. So, but that's truly typical work days. Things like that happen. And, if it happens enough, you don't question it. You just kind of roll with the punches and
Say thank you.
Yeah, and say thank you. Yeah.
I'm just curious. You poured an awful lot of concrete.
Yeah.
And you mentioned the foundations and the fact that there wasn't any. So the parts of the church where it didn't collapse were able to inject beneath the standing walls to make a foundation.
There was a portion that actually collapsed on its own. Then we took down the east wall also. and excavated there. And then we also took down the very north end, but the whole cruciform part, the cross-shaped part, we left those walls standing. And what we did, hard for me to talk without my hands, so I have a microphone in one hand. We dug into the walls, remember, were 4 feet thick. So we started on the inside. We went about a foot into the wall, and then down, and about 2 feet out. So there was like an L-shaped form, and ran rebar sideways and through to the outside of the wall. And then we did that for about a 4 to 5 foot section, and then we would skip a section and do it again 4 to 5 feet, and then do it again until we went all the way around that whole area, which was the whole north end of the church. Then, once we got and poured concrete and everything, then we dug out in between all that concrete and did the same things and filled in all the gaps, so that once we had all that done, the entire interior of the church had concrete L-shaped with rebar, so it wouldn't tilt with the L-shape. That was very, very tedious. It was all handwork. Then we went outside and did the exact same thing out all the way around the outside of the church. And these are volunteers, and they would come and show up and do it and do it and do it. It took months to do that work, but it ended up with the foot in and the foot out, and maybe a little more than a foot. We only had about, sandwiched in between, about 18 inches or so of original adobe, locked in with steel and concrete.
It's very impressive.
It all happened.
So the outside coating, stucco or plaster, gypsum plaster, there's been some controversy about using Portland, to seal outside of an adobe building,
right,
because the water can't, evaporate out.
Right.
How did you solve that problem? Did you do it a different way?
Okay. If you take a close look at the church, you'll see there's a concrete stem wall that comes up, and then there's a plaster stop along there. There's no contact with the ground, between the ground and the stucco. So what most experts believe happens is that moisture wicks up if there is a foundation, it wicks up in between the foundation and the stucco. And in this case, we have this much, it varies, but a lot of airspace in between, so that it can't do that. But
that's really interesting, because the church over in Cerro, you probably noticed they actually took the stucco off about 2.5 feet high,
right,
all the way around the building, and then left it for a year or two, I imagine, to make sure it's completely dry.
Yeah.
And then they probably did what you said, have a stop at the bottom, and then re-stuccoed it.
Well, it took us a while to convince people that we thought that would work, but it appears to be. There's one spot on the east tower that comes in contact with the ground, just because the footing was so low and we didn't want to tear down the tower. And there is some staining going on that stucco. The one, other than that, there's nothing. It's survived. And I should mention, because I hadn't mentioned it, when we brought those adobe walls up, the new ones, and together with the old ones, we wrapped the building like a basket with diamond mesh steel in 12-inch strips, continuous every 4 feet, all the way around the building on the outside. We had special drill bits made and drilled through the wall, and we put all thread through the wall, threaded rods, and we did the exact same thing on the inside and stitched that whole place together with steel inside and out every 4 feet, truly like a steel basket. And then we mud plastered over that. All volunteers. Oh, God bless them, man. Oh, man. We mud plastered all of that because, you know, the highs and lows of having the steel and the bolts and nuts and to get it more or less even. And then we put metal lath on there or stucco netting. And we did a traditional 3-coat stucco with a scratch coat, brown coat, and color coat. Well done. Really,
Probably
really.
be there for 200 years more.
Well, if it stood 170 without a foundation,
Might be a little longer.
yeah, I think it'll be there forever. I mean, if we need a bomb shelter in Questa, I would go there.
Does anybody else?
I don't have a question, but I just want to say that I'm so
Excuse me.
touched and so moved by the labor of love that was shown, and the sense of place and community that these people have for generations to come together to do the work, hard labor, tedious,
Oh,
grueling work that they did is just, wow. I'm just blown away by hearing this story.
you know, it's pretty mind-boggling. We'd have people come in from California, wherever around the country that were trying to remodel or renovate their own churches. And they say, who's your funding source? Whoever wants to donate. And who's your crew? Where did they come from? So people in town, and they just couldn't believe it.
A lot of people have a hard time understanding how things work in a small town like ours. I remember we were having something at Rael's market, and somebody came in, you know, do we need to get a caterer? He says, for what? She'll bring the Frito pie, she'll bring the tortilla, you know, and that's how it works. And what you guys did, you know, it's like when I got married for the third time, all my sister-in-laws and my sister did all the cooking. They had all kinds of food, and my wife's brother, he could not believe, because they're used to catering. They're used to having everything catered. Well, Questa catering means, orale, sister, brother, come on.
Yeah.
That's how it works here. And, you know, we put up, we always joked about, you know, you having to work with Felipe and all the guys there. Of course, Felipe is one of our favorite characters because he was in everybody's business for a long time. God bless him. But he gave everything to that church. Like he told you, if I'm going to die, this is a perfect place to die.
Yeah.
And when you think about a statement like that, it wasn't meant frivolously. It was meant from inside the heart. And I would see him working around the church, cutting the weeds and all of that. And one day he called me, stopped me, and says, I need you to help me care. What? Cut weeds? No, start my car. I left the radio on, I killed the battery. You know, stuff like that. But this is what makes our area so wonderful. And it's not just one set of people, it's everybody that's here. You know, we have the farmers market that's doing a great job now. We have this, that. We all need to, the whole world needs to look at us as an example of how to get along.
Yeah.
Yeah. And Mark, thank you.
Oh, my pleasure.
I enjoyed listening to you. You know, being around the whole thing, I still learned a lot today from what you, so.
Well, and for me, I live right next door to the church, so it was the best commute I've ever had.
Walk over with your cup of coffee.
Yeah.
Mark, I have a question. With the donations and, like you say, other people or parishes or whatever donated, was it enough for all you did?
cast your bread upon the waters. You know, it was enough for all we did. We had money in the bank when we finished. Believe it or not, the Archdiocese asked us if we could lend them some money, which we didn't do.
Thank you.
But I think, the Historic Preservation Group is still in existence, and I think they still have a little money in the bank after contributing some now to the rectory. It was miraculous. I mean, 1,600 to 2,000 people with this kind of talent and spirit. Amazing.
And if you haven't seen that Madonna, that piece of wood, you should go in just to look at that. I remember the first time I saw it, I was like, whoa.
Well, I've got a picture of a governor on her knees taking a picture of the wood before we put it up on the thing. She happened to come to Questa. It catches your attention, and you know some people don't see it, but I see it. And a lot of people do see it. And again, you hear a lot of gasping, like, and other people kind of looking at it and tilting their heads. So,
well, one of the things that we talk about, everything in that church is basically local.
yeah.
One thing that I'm very proud of is that my dad made that altar, and that altar was 50 years old already.
Mm-hmm.
That's still there in the back, that dark one. I remember him and George, hippie George. They're the ones that made that for the church back then as a donation, and that's one thing that they couldn't get rid of, because it was too. So I'm proud of that.
Oh, sure.
And so thank you guys. Any questions anyone has or ideas that we might, because we want to continue this. I'm hoping that we generate enough attention to this so we can go instead of maybe once a month, maybe twice a month. Because these are the things that we need to have to preserve not our culture but our país, our area. Because we have a lot of people from all over the world that live here, that contribute, and all of them need to be heard one way or the other. So if you have any ideas or if you think of someone who you would like to come and speak, let me know, and I'll approach them. No problem. Okay?